My name is Ellison Baird, and until last Thursday morning, I thought the worst thing in my life was forgetting to defrost chicken before dinner. I'm not dramatic. I don't do confrontation. I apologize too much. And I usually avoid conflict by laughing awkwardly until the moment passes. But that morning, the one I'll never forget, I didn't laugh. I didn't smile. I sat at the edge of a cafe booth, staring at my wife as she defended another man's actions over mine, and something inside me cracked. That moment rewired everything I thought I knew. Let me take you back, though, because people always say betrayal comes out of nowhere. It doesn't. It creeps in quietly through unlocked phone screens, late-night texts, and little laughs you were never supposed to hear. Hazel and I met 9 years ago at a farmer's market in Connecticut. I was the quiet guy selling handmade bookmarks for a charity fundraiser. She was this bright, ambitious woman in a lavender dress who asked if I had one with a quote by Virginia Woolf. I didn't. She smiled and said, "Then make one. We've been together ever since." Or we were. She worked in advertising, client strategy director, whatever that meant. I never fully understood her job, but I listened when she talked about it. About brainstorm meetings, elevator pitches, deadlines, and eventually about Jace, her new coworker. Jace said this. Jace thinks that. At first, I thought he was just one of those people that naturally dominated conversation, like a charismatic golden retriever in a blazer. Then she started working late. Then there were conferences, overnight trips. One time, she left her iPad open on the kitchen counter. I wasn't snooping, I swear. I just walked past and saw a notification flash. Jace, don't forget our secret handshake. Winky face, I stared at it. I actually convinced myself it was some dumb inside joke. I even asked her about it. She laughed a little too hard and said, "Oh my God, you're not jealous, are you?" Jace flirts with everyone. It's like his brand. I laughed too because I wanted to believe that, because believing anything else would mean stepping into the kind of pain I wasn't built for. But things kept shifting. Slowly, she stopped telling me about her day. She changed her passcode. She became defensive over nothing. One night, I asked her if she wanted to go away for the weekend. Her answer, "I think I need some space, Ellison. You get weirdly clingy when I'm busy." Clingy? That word hit harder than I expected. I didn't say anything, just nodded and changed the subject. But I felt it. The distance. It was like our marriage was being rewired from the inside out, and I didn't know how to stop it. Then came the cafe. I wasn't supposed to be there. I'd taken the day off because I hadn't been sleeping. I thought maybe getting out of the house would clear my head. I ended up at a little coffee spot near Hazel's office, one she said she rarely went to. I was halfway through a lukewarm espresso when I heard her laugh. That laugh, the one I hadn't heard at home in weeks. I turned and saw her. Hazel, sitting across from Jace, her hand on his wrist. She looked happy, unbothered, like I didn't even exist in her world anymore. They hadn't seen me yet. I could have left. I almost did. But something kept me there. Call it desperation, call it instinct. I stood up, walked over and said, "Hazel." Her face went pale. Jace didn't move. I looked at both of them and asked, "What is this?" She stuttered, then said it. The sentence that destroyed me more than anything else ever could. "Ellison, don't do this. You're making a scene." Jace didn't do anything wrong. She defended him. Not me. Not her husband. Him. I don't remember planning the words I said next. They just came out. Clear, final, and sharper than anything I'd ever said in my life. "Then you can have him." She blinked. I walked out. That was 4 days ago, and I haven't heard from her since. When I got back to the house that day, everything felt too quiet. You know, the kind of silence that buzzes in your ears and makes you question whether you've gone deaf or insane. That's what our living room sounded like. I stood there, still wearing my jacket, still in shock, just staring at the framed wedding photo we'd never taken down. Hazel was laughing in it, hair blowing in the wind, and I looked like a man who believed he'd won the lottery. But I hadn't. I'd been a placeholder. I didn't know what to do. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I just stood there. Hours passed. I don't even remember sitting down. But when I came to, the sun was setting and the room was dark. Hazel still hadn't come home. I checked my phone. Nothing. Then something strange happened. I started blaming myself. Maybe I really had been too clingy. Maybe I'd stopped being fun, stopped being interesting. I went through old texts, scrolling up to see if there was a version of me she had once loved, and if maybe I had just slowly faded out. And you know what? In the older ones, she called me Sunshine. Somewhere along the line, that nickname disappeared. I tried to sleep that night but couldn't. Every creak of the floorboards made me think she was finally coming back. When the front door opened around 2:15 a.m., I pretended to be asleep on the couch. She didn't say a word, just walked past me, quietly went upstairs, and shut the bedroom door. The next morning, I expected something, an apology, a fight, anything. But instead, she came downstairs already dressed for work, phone in hand, avoiding eye contact. She poured coffee like nothing had happened, then casually asked, "Are you still taking the car today?" That was it. That was all I got. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. And as she walked out the door, she said, "And let's not over-dramatize yesterday. Okay? We were just talking. Just talking." After nearly a decade of marriage, that's what I was reduced to. An overdramatic interruption at a cafe. Meanwhile, Jace got to sit across from her, touch her wrist, and laugh with her like they were writing some kind of romantic pilot episode. I called in sick that day and started digging. I needed to know, how long had I been replaced? So, I did something I never thought I'd do. I checked our phone bill, and what I saw shattered me in a whole new way. Hazel and Jace had exchanged over 340 texts in the last 10 days. I never thought I'd be the kind of person who spies on his spouse. But that morning, sitting at the kitchen table, I realized I had two choices: stay in the dark or find the truth and finally stop pretending everything was fine. So I opened my laptop and began going through our shared phone bill in more detail. Call logs, timestamps, patterns. There it was, a clear trail. Hazel and Jace had been texting each other every single day, usually late at night, and always for long stretches. Not just a "see you tomorrow" or "nice job at work." These were full-blown conversations that sometimes lasted until after midnight on days when she told me she was too tired to talk. I scrolled further. Some messages were during our dinner hour. Others at times when we were supposedly sitting on the couch together watching TV. It was like I was living beside her, and she was living inside her phone, inside a second life I wasn't part of. Still, there was no proof of what they were saying until I got desperate enough to check her old tablet, the one she stopped using a few months ago. She always left it in the hall drawer. I plugged it in, charged it, and waited. When it came to life, I found what I was dreading. Her messages had been sinking. Some were innocent, some weren't. I saw pictures of coffee cups on conference tables with "guess whose hand this is?" Winky face captions. One message from her said, "Sometimes I think you understand me better than anyone ever has." He replied with a heart emoji. "And that's because I actually listen." There was also a blurry mirror selfie. Her in the office bathroom, dressed in a tight black skirt, captioned, "Too much for Monday? To him, not to me. Never to me." I wanted to throw the tablet through the window. Instead, I turned it off, placed it back in the drawer, and sat down on the hallway floor like someone who had just watched a bomb go off in slow motion. She wasn't just emotionally gone. She'd chosen someone else to connect with, to flirt with, to confide in. And the worst part wasn't even the messages. It was realizing how natural it all felt to her. As if betraying me had become part of her routine, like brushing her teeth or locking the front door. That evening, I acted normal. I made dinner. I asked how her day went. She answered in single syllables and kept checking her phone, smiling to herself more than once. And I kept thinking, was she texting him right then, under the table, while chewing the chicken I made for her? Later that night, I stood outside our bedroom door, listening. I heard nothing but silence. Still, I couldn't bring myself to open the door. I went back downstairs and slept on the couch again. The next morning, I checked her location history on Google. One pin stuck out immediately. She'd spent almost 2 hours at a wine bar on Tuesday night. That was the night she told me she was doing a team-building exercise at the office. A lie so casual it actually chilled me. I saved the address. I needed to see that place for myself, needed to know what kind of setting my wife was using to erase our marriage in pieces. And that's how, a few nights later, I ended up standing in the rain across the street from a cozy wine bar, watching through the window as my wife leaned across the table, laughing, glowing, and placed her hand over Jace's. The moment I saw that, I felt nothing. Not rage, not sorrow, just hollow. But it wouldn't stay that way for long. Because what happened next was the first real sign that this wasn't just some casual affair. This was something far worse. I stayed across the street longer than I should have, soaked to the bone under a dying umbrella, just watching her laugh like the past 9 years had meant nothing. It's strange what the mind focuses on when you're in shock. I wasn't thinking about the betrayal, not about the lies. I was fixated on how effortlessly she looked at him, how she leaned in, touching his wrist the same way she used to touch mine when we were still us. And then, in the middle of a laugh, she raised her left hand to brush her hair back. That's when I noticed it. Her wedding ring, our ring, was gone. It wasn't like she forgot it at home. Hazel was deliberate about everything. That ring had been a symbol once. Now it was missing, and she didn't even seem to realize or care. She sat there, bare-fingered, like a woman who owed loyalty to no one. Something in my chest cracked, but I kept standing there, rooted to the sidewalk like an idiot. I watched them finish their drinks, watched Jace stand up and pull out her chair like some kind of cheap movie scene, watched her slide her hand into his arm as they walked outside into the night, sheltered under a shared umbrella. They didn't see me. I made sure of that. I waited until they disappeared around the corner, and then I finally turned and walked home. I don't remember the walk at all. My legs carried me on autopilot while my mind played one single thought on repeat. She took the ring off. She chose to take it off. At home, I didn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table staring at the front door, half hoping she wouldn't come back at all. But around 1:30 a.m., I heard the car pull up. The door unlocked. She came in smelling like wine and perfume, heels clicking softly on the wood floor. And then I heard it. A clink, soft but unmistakable. I crept to the hallway and peeked around the corner. She was dropping the wedding ring into a small porcelain dish by the door, the same dish we used to keep spare keys in. Like it was a trinket, like it didn't mean anything anymore. She didn't notice me. She just slipped off her shoes and padded upstairs, humming to herself. I didn't follow. I sat there in the dark, feeling like a ghost in my own house. The next morning, I waited. I thought maybe guilt would finally eat away at her. Maybe she'd sit me down and confess, or at least apologize. But Hazel came downstairs wearing yoga pants and a ponytail like it was just another normal Saturday. When she grabbed her keys and wallet, I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, "Where are you going?" She smiled, that fake, distant smile I was starting to recognize, and said, "Meeting some of the girls from work for brunch." I didn't even argue. I just watched her walk out. The porcelain dish still holding the wedding ring she didn't bother to slip back on. And it hit me like a freight train. Hazel had already left me. The marriage had ended days, maybe months ago. I was just the last fool who hadn't gotten the memo. But I wasn't about to let it end like this, quietly in the shadows. If she wanted a clean getaway, she picked the wrong husband. That afternoon, sitting alone in the living room while the clock on the wall ticked too loud, something inside me shifted. I'd spent weeks, maybe months, drowning in confusion, excuses, and denial. But now everything was clear, clearer than it had ever been. Hazel wasn't conflicted. She wasn't lost or struggling. She had made her decision a long time ago. She just hadn't told me because it was easier for her to live two lives, to squeeze the last bits of comfort out of our home while already planting roots somewhere else. And that realization hardened me. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to cry at her feet or wait for her to grant me scraps of honesty. I needed a plan, a quiet, careful, final plan. First, I started gathering everything. The synced messages from the tablet, screenshots of her location history, the cafe incident, even copies of our shared financial statements. I wasn't a confrontational guy by nature, but betrayal has a way of teaching you to be methodical. I created a hidden folder on my laptop called Exit and stored everything there. It felt strange, almost surgical, cutting my emotions out of the process. Next, I went to the guest room closet and pulled out a suitcase we hadn't used in years. I packed the essentials: clothes, important documents, my laptop, and an old photograph of my parents, the one thing that still felt untouched by all of this. Then, I called a hotel downtown and booked a room under a different last name. I even created a new email address so Hazel wouldn't see any confirmation emails if she somehow checked my devices. The hardest part was making it all look normal. I spent the rest of the day pretending everything was fine. I washed dishes, mowed the lawn, even sent her a text around 4 p.m. "Hope you're having fun at brunch. Pick up some bread if you pass a store. Like a good little husband." She replied with a thumbs-up emoji. That night when she came home, she was humming again, that same careless little tune. She breezed through the door, tossed her purse on the counter, and started scrolling through her phone without even glancing at me. I watched her from across the room, really looked at her. Not the woman I married, but the stranger she had become. She was beautiful, sure, still effortlessly stunning. But the beauty I used to see had been tied to everything we shared. The late-night talks, the whispered jokes, the dreams. Now it was hollow, like a stunning painting that someone had ripped the soul out of. And in that moment, I realized something even worse than being cheated on. I didn't love her anymore. I loved the memory of who she used to be. The girl in the lavender dress at the farmer's market. Not the woman standing in front of me now, tapping away at her phone, probably messaging him while I sat 10 feet away. I stood up and walked past her without a word. She didn't even notice. I went upstairs, checked my bag one last time, then laid down on the guest bed, fully dressed, waiting for morning. Tomorrow everything would change. I wasn't going to fight for her. I wasn't going to scream or demand explanations she didn't want to give. No, I was going to do the one thing she never expected from me, the one thing she feared without even realizing it. I was going to walk away, and this time, she would have to live with the silence she created. The next morning felt colder than any morning I'd ever known. Not because of the weather, it was mild for early spring, but because something inside me had shut down completely. I got up before dawn, showered, dressed, and zipped my suitcase quietly, like a man sneaking out of a stranger's house rather than his own. Hazel was still asleep upstairs, curled under our big comforter, breathing evenly, oblivious. For a brief second, standing in the hallway with my bag in hand, I hesitated. I thought about all the mornings we used to spend together, sharing burnt toast and bad coffee, laughing at dumb jokes only we understood. I thought about the road trips, the lazy Sundays, the whispered promises made under that very roof. And then I remembered the way she smiled at him, the way she touched his wrist, the way she took off her ring and never looked back. I left my house key on the kitchen counter beside a short note I wrote the night before. It wasn't angry. It wasn't emotional. It was just 6 words scribbled in my sloppy handwriting. I deserved better. Goodbye, Ellison. No accusations, no drama, just truth. As I closed the front door behind me, a strange calm settled over me. A numbness that wasn't sad or angry. It was just done. Like walking away from a burning building you tried for years to save, but finally realized you couldn't. I drove to the hotel in silence, checked into a bland room that smelled faintly of cleaning supplies and new carpet, and sat on the edge of the bed staring at the wall. I expected to feel something huge, grief maybe, or rage or loneliness. Instead, all I felt was exhausted. I slept most of that day. No nightmares, no dreams. When I woke up in the evening, there were 20 missed calls from Hazel. Voicemails, too. Some frantic, some angry, some with that weird, fake sweetness she used to use whenever she needed something. I didn't listen to a single one of them. Later that night, there was a knock at my hotel door. I didn't answer. I peered through the peephole and saw her standing there. Hair messy, no makeup, wearing the old college sweatshirt she usually only wore when she was scared or sad. She stayed for a few minutes, knocking again, calling my name softly through the door. But I didn't open it. I didn't say a word. Eventually, she gave up and walked away. And watching her retreat down that ugly hotel hallway, shoulders slumped, I realized something incredibly freeing. I wasn't her problem anymore. Her choices, her lies, her regrets. They all belonged to her now, not to me. That night, for the first time in longer than I could remember, I slept through the entire night without waking up once. And in the morning, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. 2 days passed before I agreed to meet Hazel. I didn't respond to her endless texts or calls, not because I wanted to punish her, but because I genuinely didn't know if there was anything left to say. I needed time to understand what I wanted and, more importantly, what I didn't. When I finally answered her call, I kept it short. I told her we could meet at a public place, a diner on the far edge of town where nobody knew us. Neutral ground, no drama. I arrived early, sitting at a booth by the window, watching the cars glide past in the drizzle. I didn't feel nervous. I didn't feel angry. Honestly, I didn't feel much of anything except tired of being dragged through emotions I never asked for. Hazel walked in 10 minutes late. Her hair was pulled back in a loose braid. No jewelry, dark circles under her eyes. She looked smaller somehow, like the weight of her choices had finally settled on her shoulders. She scanned the room, spotted me, and came over hesitantly. "Ellison," she breathed out, sliding into the seat across from me like she was approaching a wounded animal. "I didn't think you'd actually come." "I'm not here for a reunion," I said quietly, folding my hands in front of me. "I just think you deserve to hear it from me and not through unanswered calls." She winced but nodded, wringing her hands together in her lap. I let the silence stretch. I wanted her to feel how heavy it had become between us. "I made mistakes," she started, voice shaking. "Big ones. But you have to believe me. I never wanted to hurt you." I almost laughed, not out of humor, but disbelief. It's amazing how cheaters always say they didn't mean to hurt anyone, as if betrayal could happen by accident, like tripping over a sidewalk crack. "You didn't hurt me by accident, Hazel," I said, keeping my tone level. "You made choices. Every late-night text, every time you lied about working late, every time you smiled at him the way you used to smile at me. You didn't just hurt me, you erased me." She opened her mouth to argue, but I shook my head. "Don't," I said, sharper than I intended. "You had every opportunity to be honest. You chose secrecy. You chose him. And you know what? That's fine." Tears welled up in her eyes. She tried to reach across the table, but I pulled my hands back. Her face crumpled. "I miss you," she whispered. "I miss what we had." "No," I corrected her, voice quiet but firm. "You miss who I was to you. The steady, loyal guy who made you feel safe while you chased excitement somewhere else." She stared at me, broken and desperate, but it didn't move me the way I thought it would. It didn't spark hope or pity. It just confirmed something I already knew. I didn't belong to her anymore. "I'm not coming back," I said simply. "And you're not the woman I married. I hope you figure yourself out, Hazel. I really do. But you'll have to do it without me." Her shoulders shook with silent sobs. I stood up, dropped enough cash on the table to cover her untouched coffee, and walked out into the rainy afternoon. I didn't look back. Not once. As I stepped into my car, soaked but somehow weightless, I realized the real betrayal hadn't been about Jace. It hadn't even been about the texts or the missing wedding ring. The real betrayal was how easily she had let me become invisible. And finally, I was done begging to be seen. The weeks after that final conversation were not easy. There were moments when the emptiness felt unbearable. Not because I missed Hazel herself, but because I missed the life I thought we had. I missed the idea of us. Grief is funny that way. It tricks you into mourning people who no longer exist. But every day that passed, it got a little easier to breathe. I stopped checking my phone for messages that weren't coming. I stopped replaying the memories that used to tear me apart. Instead, I started doing something I hadn't done in years. Living for myself. I took long walks without a destination. I sat at coffee shops reading old books I loved in college. I called friends I hadn't seen in ages and said yes when they invited me out, even when my first instinct was to make an excuse and hide. I even dusted off my old camera and started taking photos again. Not for anyone else, not to impress, just because it made me feel something. For the first time in years, I wasn't part of someone else's background noise. I was writing my own story. One morning, about a month after I left, I stood on a small wooden bridge in the middle of a park, watching the water flow beneath me. It was one of those rare spring days where the air smells clean and the world feels new. I looked down at my reflection, half expecting to see a broken man staring back, but I didn't. I saw someone steady, someone whole, someone free. Hazel tried reaching out a few more times. Emails, a letter. I never responded. There was nothing left to say. Her chapter in my life had closed, not with a slam, not with rage, but with quiet, peaceful finality. And standing there on that bridge, sunlight warming my face, I realized something beautiful. Being alone didn't mean being empty. It meant being open. Open to new memories, new people, new dreams. Open to a life where love would never feel like a competition or a slow eraser. Open to a future I was finally ready to create on my own terms. For the first time in a long, long while, I smiled. Not because someone else made me, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. Hazel had tried to replace me without even noticing. But in the end, I replaced the version of myself that needed her.